Hi everyone and welcome to a new video on the CBI channel. In this tutorial series developing a full stack application using Python Django as our backend and React.js in our frontend. This is not the first video in this tutorial series, we're already on number 8. And in previous videos we've already completed the setup. We've created page navigation using Material UI components and React Router DOM. And we've started our CRUD process by enabling us to send records to our backend database. In this video, we're going to go further and we're going to make sure that we can get a list of all of the records in our database onto our front end. We're going to visualize them in a nice table and make sure that we can get to the details for different records inside of our pages. And to achieve that, we're going to follow a number of steps. We're going to start by fetching data from our backend to our front end using the URLs that we've already defined in a previous video. Next, we're going to install some packages for using Material React table, because that is the table that we will be using to display our information. We're going to add this table to our homepage, and we're going to define the relevant columns and the data that we want to display. We're going to also format the dates so they're a little bit more readable for us, and we're going to add filtering. And lastly, we're going to add some links to our table so we can get to pages to edit and delete our records. So we are now in our code and let's fetch some data on the home page. But before I'm going to do that, I'm just going to remove these warnings because they're quite annoying and they come from create.js. And in there I can remove use state in the top, and I can also remove reset and set value from here. So let's save that so those will go away. And we can do the same for the date picker field, where we still have demo container, which we actually don't use. So let's get that one out of the way as well. Perfect. So on the home.js page, we want to fetch the data that we are getting from our backend. Now I've just started my backend server. And if we go to our backend through the browser, you can see that when we go to project, this is where we get a list of all of the different projects that we have. So what we need to do is we need to get information from this URL so we can display it in our project. And what we also did in a previous video, so please go back if you will see that already, is we have defined an Axios statement which we can reuse and to make sure that we can get data from our backend to our front end and vice versa. So we're going to be using this to fetch the data and make sure that it's visible in our console. So on our home.js file, I'm going to define firstly a constant, and I'm going to call it get data. And we're going to format this the same as what we did within create.js. So we're actually doing the same thing as with submission right here. So going to the home page, I can say constant get data, and that is going to be equal to this arrow function, and just define the square brackets here as well. And in here we are going to define our Axios instance. But to use that, we first need to import Axios instance from our file. And now in here we can define Axios instance dot get. And now we need to specify where we want to get that information from. And similarly to last time, we can simply define the backwards commas and say that we want to get it from project and end it with a slash. Now this is actually all that we need to do for now, but we also need to define what we need to do with this information. So also similarly to our create.js file, we're going to add a .then statement here. So I'm just going to copy that over to my home page. So for now we're going to say .then, and we're going to log this information. So I'm going to say console.log, and I want to log res.data. Now currently this constant is not being used. It doesn't really say when it's going to trigger this. And to make sure that we trigger this when the page loads, we can use effect. So on the top of the screen, I'm going to put this import of React in these curly brackets, and I'm going to add use effect. Use effect is going to make sure that it renders this function when we first get to the page, but not to re-render it afterwards. So below the constant of get data, I'm going to define use effect. And then I'm going to open twice the round brackets. And within this round bracket here, I'm going to define a function with the squirrely brackets like this. And in here, I can define get data. And I need to be one of them here, like this. All right. And then after this bracket here, I'm going to put two square brackets because that's going to make sure that we only go for get data on the initial render and not afterwards. And actually the get data also needs to be within these round brackets like so. And this should, when we hit this page, get the data through the Axios instance, put it in my console, and only do it once we hit the page. So let's see if that is the case on my homepage. I'm going to start my server and take you there right now. So we are now on our homepage in our React.js frontend. And when I click on inspect and go to the console, let's see what we see there. Okay, so you can see that we have an array of 5 records, and these are all of my projects that we are fetching from our backend. So this seems to be working fine. So that is the first step completed. The second step is installing everything we need for Material React Table, because that's what we're going to be using to display our information. And Material React Table is a combination of using Material UI together with React Table, which ends up with some really nice results. And I can show you the basic example here. It is simply just the columns with a lot of functionality to filter, and that's all available out of the box. So that's what we'll be using in this project. So if you go to install, you can see that you need a couple of things before you can use it. You need MUI material, which we have. We need the icons from Material UI, which we also already installed. We need emotion react and emotion styled, which we also have. And we also need these two right here, which we luckily also have right here. And the quick install is using npm install Material React Table. So I'm going to copy this code right here and go to my front end terminal and just stop it and install this package like this. And let's give it some time to run. So our install is completed, and now we can use it inside of our project. So I'm going back to the documentation, and for this case, I'm just going to use a basic example that we can utilize in our project. And it already provides a source code for JavaScript right here. So the first thing that we need is an import, and that's the import of Material React Table from Material React Table. So I'm going to take that to my front end and put that in here, because that is what we will need. Next, you can see that it provides a constant of data, which then feeds into these different data points like so. And in addition, it has a constant with columns that uses use memo, and there it seems to define what data it needs to get, and also the header name and the size of the columns at this state. And then it returns the React table with the columns and the data. So for this example, let's first just use this data that is defined here, and then we can change that later on to our own data. So I'm going to copy this data and the entire table and put it in our front end. So I'm going to go like this and put this return, everything that's inside of this return, copy that and put it between my div. So, and then we need to, of course, delete this return right here. And that should be okay. And we also need to import use memo. So I'm going to go on the top and expand this here and use, say, use memo, because it also comes directly from React. And it appears that we have, we have a little bit. This also needs to go. And now we have our constant columns and we have our constant data. And let's see what this returns when I start my server. So back in our code now, you can see that it works perfectly. And we can even show and hide the filters, which works fine. And we can filter on the different values as well. So now we need to apply this, but then to our own data. And that means that we need to define the different columns and that we then need to also define a constant of data. So let's start with the constant of data. Now, this means that we no longer need to put our data like here in our console, but we actually need to put it in some kind of a constant on the top. So to do that, we're going to use state, and we first need to import that on top. To use state to store our data, we can say constant, and then we can say my data and set my data, and that is going to be equal to use state. And what this does is we can use set my data to populate the my data variable. So instead of console logging the data, which we can also do, we can also mention that we want to set my data equal to res.data. Now if we refer to the my data variable, we will get the records that have been set here by set my data. So let's try that out. So we can now say that this data variable is no longer needed because our data is stored inside of a constant. And the next thing that we need to define to make this complete is we need to set the columns that we're going to be using. The first column we're going to be using is name, which is the project name for us. And this is inside of the name variable. Next, we have a status, and we're going to set that to status. We have comments, and there I want the header name also to be comments, but then with a capital. We have a start date, which is going to be the header of start date. And lastly, we have an end date, and the header is going to be end date. And now on the bottom here of our material React table, the columns have still been defined as columns, but the data is going to be defined as my data, because that is going to refer to this data right here. So let's save it and see what the result is going to tell us. And as you can see, we're facing an error, and it says we cannot read the properties of undefined reading length. Now you might think, what does this mean? But actually what it means is that the table that what it means is that Material React Table is attempting to create the table inside of our homepage before the data was actually loaded. And this means that it gets no data to be passed to begin with, which means that it throws an error. So we need to tell the table when the data is ready to be loaded, so it can then do it without providing an error. And the easiest way to do this is by creating another constant on the top of my on the JS file. And I'm going to call that loading set loading. And by default, it is going to be equal to true. Next, we're going to define in our getData statement that only after our data has been passed to the setMyData variable, then we're going to set loading to false. And when this has been set to false, we want to display our table. So I'm going to go to the bottom to where we have our table right here. And here we're going to define some conditional logic, which only is going to show the table when loading is false. And we can do that by opening some parentheses, and let's wrap our table inside of those. And in case that it is loading, which will then return true, I want to have a p tag, just going to say loading data, and else, which is this thing right here, I want to show our table. Let's see what it does right now. And you can see when we return to our front end and we reload the page that it does just that. You will see loading data for a brief second, and after that it will show all of our data like here. And this is actually quite good because we have achieved a big part of our results. Now, the handy part of this table right here is that we don't need to enable any additional filter options. Of course, you can go through the documentation here and you can add some different things from advanced examples and all these kind of things. So you have everything on by default and you can make it as complicated as you want. But for our use case right now, this is already quite good because I can show or hide filters like so. I can, for example, only filter on the open records, or I can filter on name and even by date as well. And you can do a lot of different things here. I can sort by name ascending, descending. I can even hide it, which is quite nice. And then I can go back here and decide to show it again. So there are a lot of options to display the data by using Material React Table. If you want me to show you how this works in more detail, let me know in the comments and then maybe I can make a separate series on it if there is enough people interested in this. But for now, all that I want to change is I want to change the date format to display it in day, day, month, month, year, year, year. And I want to include links to potential edit pages and delete pages so that we can navigate to different records from our application. Now let's solve one of our first issues, and that is making sure that the date format is actually day, day, month, month, year, year, year. So to do that, we're going to import something we've also used in the previous tutorial, and that is day.js from day.js. And this needs to be a capital letter, like so, because this is going to enable us to change the format of the date for us. Now I'm going to go down to the columns where we have the start date, and actually the accessor key can go, and we're going to replace that by accessor fn, where the n is a small letter like so. Accessor fn lets us do some stuff based on row level. So I'm going to define here that we want to take something from row, and then I'm going to invoke a function. And in here, we can say day.js, and then we refer to row.startDate because we're doing this for the start date. And then we're going to do .format. And in here, we can specify the date format. And I can say I want day, day, month, month, year, 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 year. Let's see what this does in our front end. So we're back in our application, and you can now see that the date format of our start date has changed to day, day, month, month, year, year, year. So this is very nice. And we're also going to do that for the end date. So I'm going to copy this accessor key, and I'm just going to replace start date with end date, and that should solve our challenge. And you can see now that it is also changed for the end date. So that is very nice. So our second challenge is making sure that we can edit and delete, or at least go to the pages we can edit and delete these records. And you can see in this Material React Table documentation that we can add these buttons in our rows, which can then do certain things. So if I look at the source code for this example, you see that it enables the row actions, and then it takes the row actions in row and table, and it does certain things. So for example, the icon button here opens a window that's going to mail to this particular email address. And the icon buttons there are also doing certain things based on clicks. So what we can do is we can copy over this example, set it to empty for now, but when the time comes, we can say that onClick is going to be equal to following a link. And that will make sure that we can go to different pages. So I'm going to copy the full example from enable row actions. We're going to paste it inside of our code. And to increase the readability, I'm just going to put these as separate rows. And then I can do this and insert the entire example like this. Just going to quickly stop my front-end server because it's going crazy a little bit. And of course, we will not need all of the things that we see here. So let's get out what we don't need and make sure that we have what we want. So the first icon button sends an email. Now I don't want to send an email, so I am going to get rid of the first icon button here. And let's organize this a little bit. So we have one icon button here that is going to display the edit icon, which is nice. And then we have the second icon button here, and that one is going to have the delete record. And for now, I don't want to have any real action following it. I just want to have these buttons in there so that we can display it on our page. I will add the links later to these buttons. So for now, this is absolutely fine for me. And I'm going to do the same thing for the icon button where we remove the on-click statement. Just make this thing a little bit more compact like so. Also fix these indentations right here, and that's much better. Also, I see that they use row and table. I don't really use those at the moment, so I'm just going to leave this for now because we don't really do any actions at this moment. Now, of course, we do need to make imports because we need to use box, icon button, edit icon, and delete icon. So let's go to the top of our screen and import those. So the first thing that we need to import is box from material UI. And I also need to import icon button. And I think these can be in the same bracket like so. And in the example right here, you can see that they have edit as edit icon, delete as delete icon from these ones right here. And they also specify it like that in their code. So let's save that in our code and start our server to see the results. And we are back in our server, and you can see that we now have icons here for certain actions. So I have the edit icon to go to the edit page and the delete icon to go to the delete page. And in the next tutorials, we're going to create specific pages for editing records and deleting records. And through these buttons here, we can navigate to those pages. So that's going to be very nice for us then. And this is actually all for today's video. In this video, I showed you how you can fetch data from the backend to the front end and how we can display these in a nice table using Material React Table. We also formatted the dates nicely and already added some buttons that are going to follow links to editing and the leading pages. In the next video, we're going to continue and we're going to create a page for editing records. And in the video after that, we will close off this tutorial series by also creating pages for the leading records. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.